Stacy, sometime soon. Let's figure out a time. Oh, anyway, okay. I will
I'm
call.
waiting for people to come into the waiting room.
Okay. So, sometime in the next, day. Let me know when are people there?
Yep, you can
Oh,
go.
okay, because I can't. I only see Christina.
Jennifer should be there too. And as they come in, I will let them in.
Okay, there's no other people there
Not yet.
or something. Okay. Well, welcome to brainstorming the human connection. We had a bit of a strange start this morning with some technological difficulties. Things were out wrong way, but it happens. That's that's how the internet works. You didn't burn enough internet god incense or something. Well, anyway, we're going to be moving on, even though we're a little bit late, but we'll still try to finish up on time. Uh, Today, we're going to be talking about a subject that's actually quite in the news now with the election and everything. You'll hear people talk about Title IX, and a lot of times we forget, you know, what it was like before Title IX, and so it doesn't get enough credit for how it has changed things. And we're going to go back and talk a little bit about how that got started, and then we want to hear your takes also on your experiences, because Title IX really was a gateway. It wasn't enough of a gateway, but it was a good start to getting girls to develop into more productive members of society and allowing them to make contributions to us all. And I always like to underscore that, because a lot of times when we think about uh, equity and inclusion and diversity, we think of it as we're giving somebody something for free, right? Something they somehow don't deserve. And nothing could be really further from the truth. If we approach our societal problems from the vantage point that all the help we can get, we can use. We need everybody's shoulder to the wheel. Everybody that has a contribution, we should be able to utilize their skills and their talent and their energy. And essentially, Title IX and other kind of programs like that just give us an opportunity to get more people in the mix, making more contributions. So it isn't just for those people who are targeted to let them in too. It's for all of our good. And once we understand that this is not a zero-sum game where somebody has to lose, but all of us win, and we're not just have these kind of I call them kind of egotistical competitions or identity competitions. We can say it in a nicer way. Um, then we start to see the value in it. So today we have uh, an author who has been actually talking. Her book is about kind of the beginning of that uh, uh, Title IX effort. We have Sheri Brenden. She's the author of Breakpoint. And Sheri, welcome to our conversation. Can you
Thank you,
give
Lawrence.
us, yeah, can you give us a little bit of background on you? I always like to have people uh, give their own introductions, because then it doesn't get filtered through me.
Sure, sure. So I am a Minnesotan, grew up in St. Cloud, and my older sister, there were five kids in my family. My sister, who's closest in age to me, um, was the focus of my book. And she was a very good tennis player. And I later on followed her path, and I played sports in high school, in college. And then I went on to work at a newspaper and a farm supply cooperative as a writer and editor. And then I got a degree in library science and worked at a couple of law firms as a research librarian. And in the course of all of that, became interested in the fact that while I knew my sister had accomplished something, I recognized that other people didn't really know what it was. They didn't really talk about female athletes very much from the past. They were sort of an afterthought or a occasional anniversary sort of event. But my sister's contribution was a little more nuanced, and so didn't really lend itself to a quick soundbite kind of thing. So I decided I really didn't fully know how to explain it, and I would research it and write a book because I thought it was a pretty big accomplishment. Um, and so this is my first book, and I would say the book for which I was meant to write because of my skills both as a researcher and a writer, but also as the younger sister watching this whole thing play out and experiencing the aftermath of my sister's federal lawsuit, which broke open the doors for high school athletics for girls.
Great. Can you give us kind of the 50,000-foot view of the book for those who are not familiar with it?
Sure. So in 1972, that's when the story is set. The world was kind of a different place for girls and women. There were very specific paths that you could expect to follow. Career-wise, perhaps you would imagine yourself as a teacher or a nurse, or a secretary or a hairdresser. But you probably didn't know that there would be a lot of options outside of that, or you wouldn't imagine that you could reach those. Colleges did not admit women in the same numbers as they were admitting men. They, in fact, had quotas in some cases, limiting the number of women entering college. And for me, at the time, I was like a seventh grader, and there were specific classes that I would take and the boys would not take. So, for example, I took home economics, and I would learn to sew a apron. My male classmates would take, well, I would call it shop, but maybe industrial arts, and they would build birdhouses. And there wasn't an option to choose. You had a path. And at the time, Congress was talking about this very concept that girls were being discouraged or not allowed to take advanced math and science classes in high schools. They were discouraged from certain kinds of vocational training because it wasn't a path for them. And that played out as you looked in athletics. Within colleges at the time, about 2% of the athletic budget went to support girls participating in sports. The rest was all for boys. And so with that kind of backdrop, there were resources limiting what girls could do. There were cultural values telling them what they could do. And my sister entered high school as a very good tennis player. She had been playing across the Minnesota, South Dakota, Wisconsin area, Iowa, and she had done summer tournaments and, learned from the park and rec department and spent a lot of time practicing. And so she knew a lot of the boys in her class who played tennis, and she knew they had a team. And so I think finally her senior year, well, actually, she raised it with her coach in her junior year. Can I play on the team? There were no interscholastic girls sports teams in St. Cloud Tech at the time, which was a very good size high school. There was recreational opportunities and intramurals and things they'd call sort of play dates where they might spontaneously set up a little, gathering of girls to play sports together. But there was not teams with coaches and practice space and uniforms and travel and all the things that boys had come to expect in their interscholastic sports experience. And so my sister was told by the coach, no, I'm sorry, you can't be on the team. There's a Minnesota State High School League rule that forbids girls from competing on boys' teams. And there was also a rule that forbid boys from competing on girls' teams, but that didn't really seem to be an issue. But this had come about as the Minnesota State High School League had begun to figure out how it was going to administer girls' sports, and they had started back in 1968, and the pace just wasn't really moving fast enough for people like my sister. I'm sure there was a lot of girls who would say the same thing, who missed out on any opportunity to play that kind of competitive sport because the schools had not embraced it. They had not invested in it. And so my sister wrote a letter to the Minnesota Civil Liberties Union. She'd heard about this through my brother-in-law and sister, who are a little bit older, and he had taken an education class, and it had discussed that role that the Minnesota Civil Liberties Union could take in these kinds of issues. So she wrote a letter, sent it off, didn't really know what it would mean. At the same time, there was another young woman in Hopkins, Minnesota. She was actually a junior at the time. My sister was a senior. And she was a cross-country skier and runner. And she too wanted to play on the team. And she too had been told, nope, she couldn't. There was a rule that forbid that. Even though she had been practicing with the team, she could not ever be part of the team in its competition. So her mom also reached out to the Minnesota Civil Liberties Union. My sister tried to raise the level of urgency because, of course, she knew the spring was coming and the season would be upon her, and then she would graduate. And so she actually typed in her letter all the reasons why she would hope for some assistance, and then she added a PS, please hurry, I'm a senior. Well, the Minnesota Civil Liberties Union said they would take on these two cases. They merged them into one, got a volunteer attorney, and he would bring it to federal court, while across the country, there are all sorts of girls in this place or that place, Michigan, New York, New Jersey, who raised the issues because they too struggled to have that chance to participate. They did not have the same sort of level of court process before them. They didn't necessarily have a federal court case. They did not have the same they didn't appeal it and so forth to the highest levels. But my sister and Tony St. Pierre, who was the skier and runner, she actually lived in the same school district as my own kids attended, so it feels very familiar to me. They brought the case to a judge here in Minnesota, Judge Miles Lord, who at the time was kind of known as a bit of a maverick, who really looked out for the little guy, wasn't one who worked hard to judge or to help or further the Goliath in the David and Goliath battles. So anyway, there was a very fast proceeding. He was willing to bring this case to a quick resolution. There was several days of hearings with all sorts of testimony, much of it sort of exemplifying attitudes as opposed to law or evidence. So lots of talk about why women's bodies were not up to the task of participating in these sports. Their hips were too wide, their lungs were not sufficient, their muscles were too small. They would always lose to boys. Their coaches would be uncomfortable dealing with these girls. And the ongoing message was, this will undo the prospect of girls' athletics as a program ever developing. Some of that was they'd say, oh, well, boys will decide they want to join girls' teams, and then there won't be any, space for girls, or girls won't be available to play on their own teams because they'll all be playing on the boys' teams. And so there was all sorts of catastrophizing about if these two girls chose to participate on their high school team, it would undo the future of girls' sport. Well, in fact, the judge ruled on behalf of these two girls. He did not make it a blanket statement about the rule in general, but he said that these two girls should have the opportunity to play on the specific teams which they requested to be a part of. And the Minnesota State High School League was not going to live with that and chose to send it to the appellate courts, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. And so my sister got to participate as a tennis player for part of the season, her senior year. He didn't decide before the beginning, but he did decide soon enough, so she was able to play 5 matches. And then Tony actually was basically kept out of cross country in the fall because of some other rule that the Minnesota State High School League pointed to that they felt would keep her from participating. But she did ski in the winter. But then the appellate courts finally weighed in, and they upheld Judge Miles Lord's ruling. And what was so significant about this is that when they had this case, they never referenced Title IX because Title IX was not yet enacted. Their case was decided in May of 1972, and Title IX was enacted in June of 1972. So their whole discussion was based on a constitutional issue of equal access under the law, and that was the emphasis of the case. But when the Eighth Circuit finally upheld that decision, they noted that, hey, while we see that the Constitution provides some protection for this, we also recognize that Congress is trying to do something to give girls greater equality within the educational setting, and that's Title IX. And while Title IX is a very brief law, it's about 37 words, it's all focused on educational activities. It's protecting the rights of girls and women within educational institutions that receive federal funding. Okay. So it doesn't specifically reference sports at all, doesn't say a single word in the basic law, but the panel of judges that reviewed Peg and Tony's case said, well, we can see that high school athletics is an educational activity and needs to be protected by this law. And so it would be the first court to ever interpret Title IX as having validity within the realm of sport. And so immediately it had that impact. My sister saw it just individually, but I followed her just a few years later, and my high school suddenly realized that it would be subject to all sorts of court cases if it would fail to provide athletic opportunities. So I had all the athletic programs I could imagine at that stage of my career.
So I would like to give our panel, our esteemed panel, a chance to kind of weigh in too. Now that you know kind of the subject, have you had any experiences where you wanted to be a part of something in your school, but the school said, no, this is for boys, this is for girls? I'll tell you one I had. I wanted to take a home ec class because I wanted to make my own shirts. And so they had never had any boys wanting to take that. So but my counselor agreed to talk to the teacher to see if I could get in. And she got back to me and she said, the teacher threatened to quit if I let you in. That was in junior high school. So, so I could feel those girls. I can feel like what they felt. And but I have to say that it actually brought up the subject because apparently nobody had ever brought that up before. And so it was the beginning of having a discussion about it. Years later, when I went back to that school just to visit, because I really liked the teachers there, and I went back to visit. And now the shop classes had girls and the home ec classes had boys. And then pretty soon, of course, they killed both of the programs. So, but at any rate, anybody else have stories about or their own life experiences about being held, let's say, excluded from an activity for gender reasons?
I will just add, I have had audiences before raise some of their experience, and I had one woman who is a wood turner, but she said I could never be in the classes when I was in high school to learn how to use the power tools and be in wood class. Right. I had another woman who said that she was a physical education teacher, and she kept having her students ask, why can't we have a team coach? Why couldn't we, why won't you coach us and let us participate in a team? Why can't we do that? And she said, I was trying to teach them all these sports, but why there was no place for them to actually, enjoy the competition of it and the actual interaction of that. She said, I finally, it just became too painful to just have to keep saying, no, I can't make that happen. She quit.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Anyone else? I'm interested in our panel's experiences, if you've had any, of trying, whether it's sports or other activities where you've been kind of excluded because of gender.
I wouldn't say I was necessarily excluded, but I was one of the first females in my community to work at a tire and lube shop. And so I had a lot of the old timer males that didn't want me touching their vehicle, did not trust the female to do the work on their vehicles, but they would gladly sit around and watch me do the work, and that it did end up breaking down the barriers, and then they'd see the work that I put out and then started requesting me, down the road. So it did feel like a victory for, women in my community then, and to see other young females that got into the positions, and even, somebody my age now is just getting into that line of work. And I'm very proud of her because of all the stereotypes of what are typically male roles or what are typically female roles. And for somebody to come in and see a female in that position and just automatically have those mindsets of, deciding somebody can't do something, or they'd want to come and help me put a tire in their trunk or whatever, thinking I couldn't lift it, just all the different things. But being able to show them that yes, I can, and do it better than a lot of the men, just in that sense. So I feel like seeing women do it and empowering them and uplifting them and paving the way, I think that's beautiful, and that those stories are getting out there too. So
I think it's worth pointing out that everything that's now conservative at one point was radical. So it's always has it. It always takes that first person, and the person who does it first, they're on the bleeding edge of change. So they're the ones that get their nose broken first. But without them, the change just doesn't happen. Anybody else have experiences that they would like to contribute. Okay, well let's go forward then, and let's start to explore kind of like underneath the initial thing of sports and Title IX, and maybe could you share with us, Sheri, how you think this kind of change in attitudes kind of leaks over into other areas, whether it's business, being able to have your own credit card without your husband signed or your father signing for it, or all those other kind of things. What kind of impact have you seen, and have you thought of and experienced as you have sort of looked deeper into this?
Yeah, so I think, well, there are studies that have been done about women CEOs that nearly 70 to 80% of them have had sports participation in their background. And some of that is because of the leadership skills they've developed, the strategic backgrounds they've, worked upon, the teamwork. Sometimes it's just the community and networking skills that they've learned. But clearly looks to be a connection to the kinds of skills and experience that you develop within athletics to take you into other areas. I like to point out that it's not really just about whether you can shoot a basketball or, throw a softball. Those aren't the key skills, but they are linking opportunities so that women start to see themselves in different positions and learn how to develop those capabilities and persevere in difficult circumstances and deal with being under the scrutiny of others, and also how to encourage and bring along and motivate their teammates. Those are all important things. And there are careers in sports as an industry that women have been locked out of. So whether it's a sports reporter, a coach, an official, perhaps working in social media for athletics, doing commentary, there's just it's a business. And if women don't have that exposure to sport, it's harder for them to move into that career opportunity as well. So, most young men who participate in sport don't go on to become pro athletes, but that doesn't mean that they might not find work that is partly a spinoff of some of their familiarity with sport.
Right. I think especially the area of team building and working as a team, those things are important. Uh, I'm just wondering whether or not you've seen links so that other people than other than this conversation have found those links and are aware that okay, play is the most important work you can do as a child. It's like that's where right from preschool, that's where you start to learn about human interactions. It's like timing and all of those things, putting out your feelings, when you're trying to like make up new rules for a new game, or at least it's new to you. Yeah, all of those kind of things that children do if the adults will leave them alone. All those kind of things that they would develop. I'm just wondering, did you see anyone else being aware of this and seeing that value in sports?
Well, I think that there's kind of any number of employers who admire particular athletic skills. So I've seen resumes probably more so with young men where they really highlight their college athletics and their participation there. But I think that we're seeing, for example, there's a Evans Caddy Scholarship that's intended for people who have some role within golf, but that recognize that we want to build the game, but also these students have really good academic skills, and the sport wants to build them and give them an opportunity they might not otherwise have to attend college. So they've worked hard to include more girls and women in that scholarship opportunity. That comes about because we have women who are moving into organizations in higher levels of sport and saying, we see the holes. We're trying to create ways for women to access the benefits of sport.
I'd like to look at some of the other underpinnings of just the idea that we should separate girls and boys. I know when I was going to junior high school, I don't see that much when I go to campuses now, but I know when I was going to junior high school, at lunchtime, there was a straight line across the field that at lunchtime, the boys couldn't go on the girls' side and the girls couldn't go on the boys' side. You know, and so that was one thing that kept us apart. The classes also, like to shop classes, sports classes, and those things, they also kept boys and girls apart. And there were rather strict ideas about what a girl was and what a boy was supposed to be. And I'm wondering how much of that we have to still overcome. And what are some ways that we could do that? And I'm asking you, but I'm also throwing this question out to our panelists. You know, we still have this issue of women being excluded from various activities. At least now we can have conversations about it. But, you know, realistically, those are still issues. But they seem to stem from ideas of identity, you know, and people thinking, well, I'm supposed to be this because my society says I'm supposed to be this. The society has said this is my lane. And I feel that to be a good member of society, I need to stay in my lane. But if I'm going to stay in my lane, I want to make sure everybody else stays in their lane. Otherwise, I don't know what this is about, right? So I'm just wondering, what do we do? What are some ideas that people would have, you know, on this call anyway? Or what ideas have you seen other people suggest that says, okay, well, yeah, it may take a while, but we need to be working on it now. We have to start working on it now. What are some things that we could do to fundamentally change our sense of gender identity? Or should we? You know, that's another question. You think we should change gender identity so that you know, we have something different than now? And if so, what to? Yes. Stacy, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I'm a former high school and college athlete as well. So this has always been kind of an interesting topic for me. And I know that earlier this year, there were revisions made to the Title IX. So, and I think they took effect August 1st, where it's actually now included that there's protections against discrimination based on sex stereotypes and sexual orientation, gender identity, sex characteristics, those types of things. So it's not even an issue of should we? I mean, we have to now. It's part of the law. So how do we do that? And Sheri, I do have another question while I got you. Did your sister and did your family, you know, and Tony, I'm sorry, did you have any inclination that what you did back then would have such a profound impact? Because now colleges and universities can't discriminate on the basis of pregnancy, on any of that, and not just for students, but for employees. So it's grown tremendously. And did you ever anticipate that?
No, my sister knew that what she was doing meant more than just her, or at least like anybody, you'd say, well, if I can do it, why wouldn't all of my friends have the same chance? But she really didn't know how widespread and how quickly it would have an impact. And so I think that part of it was something that's kind of unfolded for her over time. And I will speak to, and then Tara can probably recognize this too. There's the part about when she was doing it, it was a very lonely road. And she didn't talk about that as much as I could just see it. She did not have supporter. She did not have a team of friends and allies all encouraging and, you know, holding up her actions. She was on her own. And even though she was paired with Tony St. Pierre, they didn't ever talk. They didn't know each other. They weren't there for each other because long distance phone calls were expensive and we didn't have social media and they didn't know each other. And so it's every time she did play a match during that first season, while you'd think it would be a source of great joy, it was also a source of great tension because she felt she had to represent all girls. Like everyone was looking at her as, does she belong? Because if she doesn't belong, women don't belong on the court with these. And so she had a lot of weight to carry, which that's probably the biggest thing I would say in looking at this in terms of encouraging change is being the person who says to that girl or woman, I see what you're doing. I'm proud of you. I support you. Let me help stand with you. I try to do it by holding up. I'm active in an organization in nominating girls and women for recognition once a year. They have a National Girls and Women's Sports Day. I want to hold up these role models, these people who have put in all sorts of energy and time to build up what's possible for girls and women. And they need people to recognize them. I read my sports page regularly, mostly trying to find the references to the girls and women who are participating. And I write to my newspaper and I say, where are they? Why can't I read about the athletes in my community and in my area that are women and girls? Why do I always see 90% about men and boys? And so those kinds of things I think are visible ways to stand with those people and to say, I think this is important and I think we can make a difference together, because it's not really, it shouldn't be a one at a time kind of person thing. We need to know you have a movement of people trying to make it happen.
Well, you know, in physics, when we're trying to move something, we have two things to do. One is to reduce resistance, and the other is to increase pressure. Okay, if you want to move something or move it faster, you either add more force or you reduce resistance. Okay, so the law would represent the add more force part. Okay, so I'm looking at what would we do to reduce resistance to women becoming involved, not only in sports, but in all areas of life. What are the kind of things, can we identify why people resist that? And I should point out that it's not just men who are resisting this. Many women, and I have family members, including my mother, the idea that a girl would be helping me to fix my car, oh, I would get holy heck about that. If I had the girl, she's out there in the slopping in the oil and stuff like that and changing the transmission. Oh no, girl, come in here. Let me tell you something. Oh, it would not have happened. And then I look at like what Tara was saying. Okay, so here's this guy. He probably likely had a mother who would have. He got the idea that mom wouldn't like this, and it's just not right, you know. And so who you're listening to, your mother or Gloria Steinem? You know, it's like who's your hero? So those are the kind of attitudes that boys who grow up to be men, they have from men and women, from their society in general. They have been conditioned to expect certain things and not expect certain things from women. I'm looking to change that. And so I'm looking for ideas of how can we, what kind of things can we do personally and societally to reduce resistance to that change.
So I think a big thing is to be one of the fans and supporters of those girls who are doing those things. So, you know, Do you go to the high school girls game, or do you see if there's a kid in your neighborhood and praise them for their role on the team, or let them know that you noticed what they're making happen as a participant? That normalizes it, but also encourages it, because those boys, they hear a great deal of support for what they do in their sports career. And girls hear a lot of comments about whether they look good in their uniforms, or whether they might be demonstrating something that implies their sexuality is in question, or they might hear something about they don't act feminine enough. Girls hear so many messages that will tear down what they're trying to do in athletics in particular. That's kind of my sphere. But I think being the one who says, no, that's not what counts here. I see something else that you're really doing.
I would like to add one thing, and I'm still, this is open, so if some other people have ideas, I'm certainly interested in those. But I would say support the Girl Scouts. You know, that is a big thing. It's, you know, the Girl Scouts, they are really underappreciated historically and currently. And one way to support the Girl Scouts is when they have their cookie sales. I hate their cookies. I'll tell you that. That's the worst cookies I've ever had. So whenever I see Girl Scouts selling cookies, I just give them the money and say, keep your cookies and just throw this in the kitty. You don't have to
send them to me, Lawrence. Send them to me.
Well, I think a beautiful thing I've done with my children too is to be visible and to be out there. Like I will be throwing a football with my, sons out, so the community can see mom's doing it with her boys, like then other people driving by will see that, maybe another little girl riding her bike by will be seeing that, to be visible, if you're a female and you're doing something that, yeah, a lot of, and living in South Dakota, it feels like the mentality is, of specific gender roles, and it drives me nuts. And I love to shake things up, as a lot of you are aware from these talks. But, just to be out there, with my sons as the mom, and doing that with them, I think that that's another thing, to be visible and be active and doing those things and paving those ways and whatever way you can. So
I think along with what Tara's saying is that as moms, as women in society, if we hear or witness these types of things happening, if you're so inclined, take a chance and say, hey, you know what? Let me explain something, in a very, diplomatic way, but try do everything you can to reverse those stereotypes.
I would add along those same lines, don't tease boys when they lose to girls. That's a big thing, because a lot of the issues that we have has to do with identity. And if we pin the identity of boys who become men on always besting the girls, and if there's a penalty to be paid that's different for losing to a boy than losing to a girl, then we're going to have repercussions about that. And we can't complain, and that we can't tell the boy he has to be one thing, and then we treat him like he's supposed to be something else, because it's more or less how we act toward that boy more than what we say. The say-do gap has got to shrink. And if the boy does feel bad about losing to a girl, they try to normalize that. Just say, hey, look, man, girls can run. They can run fast. I can point you to lots of girls. We don't think they can, but we're not looking. So if you lose a race to a girl, that's not a big thing. You're just like you lose it to a boy. Somebody's got to be there to say that.
My sister, as I mentioned, played 5 matches, and she won 3 and she lost 2. And she said that pretty much every match, she said she felt like her opponent was playing for their life, that they were so fearful of losing and the ramifications of that. And, some people would say, well, those poor boys, why would you beat them in those circumstances? And my sister did not buy into that. There was no reason for her to give them a match. That's not the way you play the game. And the first match that she won was a young man from the same town as my sister, who had been coached, or who was coached by a man who had helped Peg start to play tennis from the beginning. And so he knew both of them very well. And she beat this opponent pretty clearly. And afterwards, he heard from his teammates, he got beat by a girl, started to tease and mock him. And he kind of expected that, but it was when his coach said similar things that really got under his skin. And he went home and he thought about it, and he was the captain of the tennis team at the time, a senior. And the next morning he came in and went to the coach's office and he said, I quit. I won't play on a team where that kind of thing happens. I'm not going to be a part of it.
Right.
And yeah. I think that is also a sign of somebody saying, I'm not going to buy into that garbage, that somehow I am less than, or it's somehow humiliating. But I also think it speaks to, and I've talked to young women who compete in sport now about how often they feel as though they have to deal with challenges from men about their abilities. The man wants to show them, or a boy wants to show them how much better he is against them. And that somehow this is a proving thing, and it works against both boys and girls over time as they become moving into professional positions in the workplace, that somehow there's something wrong with having a woman get a promotion that a man didn't.
Exactly. I want to bring up one final thing because I think it's one of the elephants in the room. When I was in elementary school, there was a girl who was so valued that we played sports that was outside. The adults had nothing to do with our after school sports at this particular school. We organized our own teams. We had our own baseballs and stuff. They had nothing to do. All we did is use the schoolyard, and they were all gone. So it wasn't a thing. Anyway, this girl was so good that people actually chose her. The boys wanted to choose her over the girls. Years later, I met her on a college campus, and we reconnected because I had moved away, and so I lost track of her. Anyway, we reconnected, and she said, and we talked about how popular she was in sports with the boys. And she said, I recognize that not only was I, popular in sports, but the guys always treated me just like one of the guys. She said, and that was kind of a problem because none of them ever asked me out for a date. They were all my friends, and they always treated me with respect and all of that. They wanted me for the team, but none of them asked me out for a date. So I'm wondering, where does that fit in? Because people want more than just one thing. They want to be more than a one-trick pony.
So
I would say guys do too, but that was an interesting eye-opener for me.
I would say that I think she needs to be thinking about all the reasons why those boys did not ask her out for a date. And yes, much of that was about probably high school insecurity. Not so much about whether she could throw a baseball or run really fast. Much of that could have been about just what the circumstances were of their life at that point. As a student who was, top of my class in high school, I could project, maybe people wouldn't ask me out because I was a really good student. Well, does that mean I shouldn't be a really good student? No, it's about somebody having to deal with a different attitude in building relationships. And I think, sure, it's a challenge for young men to have a date the first time, and who are they worthy of, or those kinds of things. But it's really, I'm sure she felt sad about maybe not participating in that part of the experience, I still would look at it as, hey, she created relationships and friendships. That's a powerful thing. Hopefully those young men learn something about how to be a friend to a peer, as opposed to just someone that they can sort of call the shots with.
Yeah. Well, I guess it struck me because I could see the pain in her eyes. And I don't think she cared about all the wives. She just cared about that she felt in one can she was, like she felt like I got all of these friends and they're the kind of friend I can call up in the middle of the night and say, hey, my car broke down. And they rush out to help her. And she knew that, right? And because that was her history with guys. They treated her like one of the guys, right? But she was lamenting that, yeah, I got that, and yeah, I wanted that, and I appreciated that, but there's just one thing that I lost. And like you're saying, hey, in life maybe you don't get everything, but I think that it would be, let's say, less than honest to not bring that into the mix, that people have different things that they want, and sometimes they contradict, and we have to make choices.
But I don't think it is an issue of choice. We don't all get to date all the people that we wish we could date, yeah. But we can decide to be all of that we can be within our athletic capacities or our intellectual capacities or whatever, and we don't have to, and we can create the kinds of friendships that we want, and that doesn't mean we won't end up finding the person or dating the persons that we do find illuminating and wonderful and powerful.
Yes.
I don't think one limits the other.
Yes, right. Well, I think I got this phone that I can't cut off because I'm in a hotel room. But I'll call them back. They're probably telling me, hey, get out. But so now that we're getting kind of to the last part of this, are there any other things that people would like to add to this conversation?
I guess I would just say that I think we saw, I mean, nothing happens quickly, right? Entrenched views of what's masculine and what's feminine, they take a long time to change. We saw with the boxer Khalif, I can't remember her name, but we saw that at the Olympics with people looking and saying, oh, well, she doesn't look feminine enough, therefore there must be something wrong with her. There must be some reason she shouldn't be allowed to be here. And that continues. That is still an issue. But even the things you were just talking about, I think attitudes continue to change for the better. It was exciting. A lot was made of the fact that in the Olympics, for the first time, there was absolutely equal representation of male and female athletes. I've seen some wonderful, fun, like YouTube kind of clips of male professional athletes trying to do gymnastic skills that women are doing at the, so it's hopeful, I think, but entrenched ideas take a long time to change. And thank goodness for the people that went ahead, like your sister and like Tony.
Exactly. Well, that brings us to our 11:30 mark. We got started a little later than we would like, but it's all good experience. We'll find ways to look out after that in the future. Thanks everyone for joining us, and hope you'll come back next week, same time, same station. Goodbye.
Bye.